Lover When You're Near Me by Richard Matheson. Originally published in the May 1952 issue of Galaxy magazine, which republished it for their French edition in December 1954 and for their second Galaxy Reader anthology in 1954. Then in an Italian magazine in 1953, which reproduced it in their November 1987 issue. It appeared in two more anthologies, The Best Science Fiction Stories, 1953, in that titular year, and To Sleep, Perchance to Dream, Nightmare, in 1993. Some appearances in collections of the author's stories are Born of Man and Woman, in 1954, Third from the Sun, in 1955, and Collected Stories, in 1989. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Lover, when you're near me. The silvery ship came rushing in backward through the veils of broken cloud, tobogganing down the atmosphere of Station 4. Fires of deceleration jetted red from the reactor ports, roaring their hurricane thrust against the clutch of gravity. Air thickened. The glittering rocket speck slid easier, settling down like a parachuting missile. Sunlight splashed its metal sides with light, and the blue ocean waters billowed wide to swallow it. The ship dipped in a wide arc and backed down toward the reddish-green-clad land. Inside its tiny cabin, the three men lay strapped and waiting for the shock of contact. Their eyes were closed, their hands tight and blood-drained. Muscle blocks struggled against the drag. The ground swept up. The ship settled hard on its rear braces, trembling. Then, finally, it stood motionless and silent, successfully navigated through scores of light years of vacuum night. A quarter-mile away were the warehouse, village, and house. Critical. That was official record. Station 4, the Three-Moon Psycho Ward. David Lindell knew it. All the Wentner men knew and wondered. Wentner's Interstellar Trading Company put a man on other stations for 2 years at a clip. Here on 4, it was only for 6 months. Why? Because it was critical. Why? Nobody could stand the place longer than 6 months. Why? It always came to why. But like I always say, Lindell said, it's no use worrying myself. He said it to Martin, the ship's co-pilot, as the two of them trudged across the wide meadow toward the distant compound, carrying Lindell's luggage. You have the right idea, said Martin. Don't worry yourself. That's what I always say, said Lindell. They're paying me enough, and they have to take care of me if anything happens. It's their headache. They passed the silent, gargantuan warehouse. The sliding doors were half open, and inside, Lindell could see the concrete floor empty and sunlight filtering bright ribbons through the skylight. Martin told him the cargo ship had emptied it out a few weeks before. Lindell grunted and shifted his luggage. "Where are the workers?" he asked. Martin gestured toward the native village about 300 yards away. There was no sound from the low-slung white dwellings, methodically arranged to form 3 sides of a rectangle. The windows blinked fiercely in the sunlight. "Guess they're sacked down," Martin judged. "They sleep a lot when work is done. You'll see them tomorrow, when shipments start coming in." "Got their families with them?" Lindell asked. "Nope. Thought it was company policy." "Not here. The Gnees don't have much family life. Too few men, and practically all of them pretty dumb." "Great," Lindell said. "Dandy." He shrugged. "Well, it's no use worrying myself about it." While they were on the stairs to the hallway of the house, he asked Martin where Corrigan was. "He went home with the cargo ship," Martin said. "The company allows that once in a while. There's nothing to do here anyway after the goods are picked up." "Oh," said Lindell. "What's this door?" He kicked it open and looked in at the combination living room library. "All the comforts of," he said. "More," said Martin, looking over Lindell's shoulder. "Over there you have a movie projector and a tape recorder." "Swell," Lindell said. "I can talk to myself, legal." Then he grimaced. "Let's dump these bags. My arms are falling off." They shuffled down the hall, and Lindell glanced into the small kitchen as they passed. It was porcelain-paneled and well-kept. "Can this Gnee woman cook?" he asked. "From what I hear," said Martin, "you'll be packing it in like a king." "Glad to hear it. Incidentally, you got any idea why they call this joint the Three Moon Psycho Ward?" "Who calls it?" "Well, the boys back on Earth." "The boys are all wet. You'll like it here." "But why is it only a 6-month stint?" "I don't know. Maybe the company doesn't want its help to stay here for good," said Martin. "Here's her bedroom." As they entered, the Gnee woman was making the bed, her back to the door. They thumped down the bags, and she turned slowly, unalarmed or startled. Lindell's hands twitched. "Oh, well," he thought, "I've seen worse in my day." She wore a heavy robe fastened at the neck and falling to the floor like a truncated cone of cloth. All he could see was her head. It was a squat, coarsely grained head, pink and hairless, like the mottled belly of an expecting chihuahua, he decided. For ears, there were cavities in the sides of her flat, chinless face. Her nose was a stub, single-nostriled. Her lips were thick and monkey-like, outlining a small circle of mouth. "Hello, lover," Lindell decided not to say. She came across the room quietly, and he blinked at her eyes. Then she placed a moist, spongy hand in his. "Hiya," he said. "She can't hear," Martin said. "Telepathic." "That's right. I forgot." "Hello," he thought. And "hello" came back the answering welcome. "It is good to have you." "Thanks," he said. "She seems like a decent kid," he thought to himself. "Weird, but homey." A question touched his brain like a timid hand. "Yeah, sure," he said. "Yes," he added in his mind. "What's that?" Martin asked. "She asked if she should unpack, I think." Lindell slumped down on the bed. "Ah," he said, "this I like." He pushed exploring fingers into the mattress. "Say, how do you know it's a she?" he asked when he and Martin were walking back down the hill while the Gnee woman unpacked. "The robe. The males don't wear robes." "That's all?" Martin looked away. "A few other things of absolutely no interest to you." They moved into the living room, and Lindell tried out the easy chair for size. He leaned back and stroked the arms with satisfied fingers. "Critical or not," he said, "this station has 'em all beat for comfort." He sat there momentarily, remembering the woman's eyes. They had seemed huge, covering a full third of her face, like big glass saucers with dark cup rings for pupils. And they were moist, bowls of liquid. He shrugged and let it go. "So what?" he thought. "It's nothing." "Ha! What?" he asked, hearing Martin's voice. "I said be careful." Martin was holding up a shiny gas pistol. "This is loaded," he warned. "Well, who needs it?" "You won't. Just standard equipment." Martin dropped it back in the desk drawer and shoved the drawer back in. "And you know where all your books are," he said. "The warehouse office is set up like all the other station offices." Lindell nodded. "I won't get lost." Martin glanced at his watch. "Well, I have to be going. Let's see," he continued as he and Lindell started for the door. "Anything else to tell you? You know the rule about not harming the people, of course." "Who's going to harm them?" Whoops! They'd almost knocked her over as they exited from the room. She jumped back one more bouncy step and stared at them, eyes wide and frightened. "Take it easy, kiddo," Lindell soothed. "What's up?" "Eat?" The thought cringed before him like a beggar at the back door of his mind. He pursed his lips and nodded. "You took the words right out of my head." He looked at her and concentrated. "I'll be back as soon as I walk the co-pilot to his ship. Make something good." She nodded violently and rushed toward the kitchen. "Where's she off to like a bat?" Martin asked curiously as they turned for the stairs. "She's going to rustle me a snack." Lindell chuckled as they descended. "That's what I call service deluxe. This telepathy is okay, you know. At other stations, it was either learn half the language to get a ham sandwich or try and teach him English so I wouldn't starve. Either way, I really had to sweat for my supper until things got settled." He looked pleased. "This is real hot," he said. Their heavy boots crushed down the tall, crisp blue grass as they approached the upright ship. Martin held out his hand. "Take it easy, Lindell. See you in 6 months." "Right enough. Give old man Wentner a kick in the pants for me." "Will do." He watched the co-pilot dwindle in size, ascending the metal ladder to the hatchway. A midget Martin pulled himself into the ship and clanged the metal port shut. Lindell waved back at the tiny figure at the port and then turned and walked away to escape the blast. He stood on a hill underneath the heavy scarlet foliage of a tree. Inside the ship's belly there was a liquid cough, a rush of exploding gases. He watched the ship hang for a moment on its flaming exhaust and then flash up into the green-blue sky, leaving scorched ground in its wake. The next instant it was gone. He walked in lazy strides back toward the house, gazing appreciatively at the profusion of livid plants and flowers in the meadow around him, bulbous insects hanging over them. He took off his jacket and let it hang from one hand as he walked. The sun felt good on his lean back. "Boys," he said to the fragrant air, "you're all wet." The great, blazing sun was almost gone, spraying the sky red with the blood of its cyclic dying. Soon the 3 moons would rise, guaranteed to drive insane a man looking for a shadow he could call his own. Lindell sat at the living room window, gazing out over the countryside. You couldn't beat it, he thought, for air or climate or all the things that grew in earth-paling technicolor. Nature outdid herself in this tucked-away corner of the galaxy. He sighed and stretched, wondering about supper. Drink? He started, chopping a yawn in half, and drew his fingers together so fast that the knuckle bones crackled. He saw her standing at his side, offering a tray with a glass on it. He reached for it, feeling his heart placate itself after the initial jolt. "I'd knock or something," he suggested. The big eyes were elliptical now. They stared at him without comprehension. "Well, let it go," he said after a sip of the warm, tangy liquid. He smacked his lips and took another sip, a long one. "Damn good," he said. "Thanks, lover." He blinked at himself. That brings a guy up short, he decided. Lover? Of all the unlikely names in the universe. He glanced at her with a chuckle bubbling up in his throat. She hadn't moved. Her face was screwed up into what he assumed was a smile, but her mouth wasn't designed for smiling. "Hey, when are we eating?" he asked, feeling an edge uncomfortable under the unmoving gaze of her watery eye globes. She turned and hurried to the door. There she turned. "All ready already?" He got the message. He grinned, downed the drink, got up and followed her eager shuffle down the dim hallway. Some time later he pushed away the plate with a sigh and leaned back in the chair. "That's what I call good," he said. Like a hidden spring, he felt her pleasure well up in his mind. "Lover, thanks you." She certainly picked up the name fast, he thought. She looked at him, eyes wide. Was she trying to smile again? He wondered. To him, the expression looked like all her others, the facial poses of an idiot. He thought she was smiling, though, because of the thoughts that accompanied the expression. Then he found his eyes involuntarily watering in empathy, and he turned his head, blinking. A trifle nervously, he dumped a teaspoon of sugar in his coffee and stirred. He could still feel her gaze on him. A twinge of displeasure marred his thoughts, and she turned away abruptly. That's better, he thought, and felt all right again. Hey, tell me, lover, he started to say. Well, might as well get used to it, he figured. You have a husband? Her returned thoughts were confused. A mate, he reworded. Oh, yes. In the workers' village? They have no mates, she said, and he thought he sensed a note of hauteur in her reply. He shrugged and took a sip of coffee. Well, he said, one satisfied worker would drive the rest of them crazy anyway. They'd be biting their nails if they have nails. And on that note, good night. In bed, he sat writing in his much-used diary. Between its battered covers were inscribed the sparse comments he had made on half a dozen different planets. This was his 7th station. My lucky number, he paragraphed in blue ink. Again, no sound. To sleep? His pen skittled and spat out 3 fat blots. He looked up and saw her with the tray again. Yeah, he said. Yeah, thanks, lover. But look, will you just let me know when you... He stopped, seeing that it was hopeless. This will make me sleep? He asked. Oh, yes, was the reply. He took a sip, looking down at the ink-blotted page. Just started it anyway, he thought. No loss of priceless literature. He ripped out the page and crumpled it in one hand. This is good stuff, he said, nodding his head toward the glass. He held up the paper. Throw it away, huh? Throw away? She asked. That's right, he said. Now clear out. What in hell are you doing in a man's boudoir anyway? She scuttled across the floor, and he grinned as she closed the door quietly behind herself. Finishing the drink, he set it down on the bedside table and turned off the lamp. He settled back on the soft pillow with a sigh. Critical, he thought in drowsy satisfaction. Nuts. Good night. He opened his heavy-lidded eyes and looked around. There was no one in the room. He sank back. Good night. He raised up on one elbow, squinting into the darkness. Good night. Oh, he said. Good night yourself. The thoughts abated. He fell back again and made his mouth a tooth-edged cave with yawning. How about that? He muttered thickly, turning on his side. Absolutely no mirrors. See? Nothing up my sleeves. How about that? He had a dream. The dream covered him with sweat. After breakfast, he left the house with her farewells tugging at his brain and headed across the grounds for the warehouse. Already, he saw, the Guinea men were formed in a moving line, carrying bundles on their heads. They marched into the warehouse, deposited their burden on the concrete, and had it checked off by a Guinea foreman who stood in the center of the floor, holding a clipboard thick with paper-thin vouchers. As Lindell approached, the men all bowed and looked more cowed as they hastened on their rounds. He noticed that their heads were flatter than lovers', a little more darkly tinted and with smaller eyes. Their bodies were broad and thick-muscled. They do look stupid, he thought. As he came up to the man who was doing the checking and sent out an unanswered thought, he saw that they weren't telepathic either, or maybe didn't want to be. Howdy doody, said the man in a squeaky voice. I check. You check? That's okay, Lindell said, pushing back the clipboard. Just bring it into the office when the first batch is all in. "What? Ha!" said the man. "Geez, are you a case?" Lindell thought. "Bring this," he said, tapping the clipped sheaf of papers. "Bring to office." He pointed again. "Bring to me. Me. When goods are all in." The man's splotchy face lit up with a look of eager stupidity, and he nodded brightly. Lindell patted his shoulder. "Good boy," rapped his mind. "I bet you're dynamite in a crisis." He headed for the office, gritting his teeth. Inside, he shut the plexiglass door behind him and looked around the office. It was all the same as he remembered from other stations, except for the cot in one corner. "Don't tell me I have to sleep out here nights," he thought with a groan. He moved closer. On the flat soil-cased pillow was the imprint of a head. He picked up a light brown hair. "And what in the hell is this?" he wondered. Under the cot he found a belt without a buckle. On the wall by the cot there were violent scratches, as though a man in fever had tried to get out of the office the hard way. He stared at them. "The joint is haunted," he concluded with a vague shake of his head. Then he turned away with a shrug. "No use worrying myself," he thought. "I got 6 months to go, and nothing's going to get me down." He sat down quickly before the desk and dragged the heavy station log before himself. He flipped open the heavy cover and started reading from the beginning. The first entries were 20 years dry. They were signed Jefferson Winters, or a little later, a hasty Jeff. At the end of 6 months and 52 closely packed pages, Lindell found page 53 covered with a floridly penned message. "Station 4. Goodbye forever." Jeff didn't seem to have had any difficulties adjusting to the life there. Lindell shifted back in the creaking chair and pulled the heavy book on his lap with a sigh of boredom. It was after the first replacement's second month that the entries started to get ragged. There were blurred words, hurried scrawling, mistakes deleted and redone. Some of the errors apparently had been corrected much later by still another replacement. It was that way through the next 400 or so sleep-inducing pages, a sorry chain of flaws and eventual correction. Lindell flipped through them wearily without the slightest interest in their content. Then he reached the entries signed Bill Corrigan, and with a blinking yawn he straightened himself up, propped the book on the desk, and paid closer attention. They were the same as in every case before, excluding the first one, efficient beginnings declining markedly to increased wildness, the penmanship erring more extravagantly with each month until, at last, it became almost illegible. He found a few blatantly miscalculated additions which he corrected in his careful hand. Corrigan's writing, he noted, broke off in the middle of a word one afternoon, and for the last month and a half of Corrigan's stay, there were nothing but blank pages. He thumbed through them carelessly, shaking his head slowly. "Have to admit it," he thought. "I don't get it." Sitting in the living room through twilight and later at supper, he began to get the sensation that Lover's thoughts were somehow alive, like microscopic insects crawling in and out among the fissures of his brain. Sometimes they barely moved, other times they leaped excitedly. Once, when he became a little irritated with her staring, the thoughts were like invisible suppliants pawing weepily at his mind. What was worse, he realized while reading in bed the sensation occurred even when she wasn't in the same room with him. It was disconcerting enough to feel an endless stream of thoughts flowing into him while she was close. This remote control business was just a little too much for his taste. "Hey, how about it?" He tried to reason her away good-naturedly, but all he got back was the picture of her looking at him wide-eyed and uncomprehending. "Ah, nuts," he muttered and tossed his book on the bedside table. "Maybe that's it," he thought, settling down for the night. "This telepathy gimmick, maybe that was what got the other men. Well, not me," he vowed. "I just won't worry myself about it." And he turned out the lamp, said good night to the air, and went to sleep. Sleep, he muttered, unaware, only partly conscious. It wasn't sleep, not deep enough by half. A cloudy haze submerged his mind and filled it with the same detailed scene. It telescoped and sank away in a burst. It magnified, welling up and swallowing him and everything. Lover, lover. The echo of a shriek in a long black corridor. The robe fluttering close by. He saw her pale features. No, he said. Stay away. Far, close, beyond, upon. He cried out. No, no, no. He jolted up in the darkness with a choking grunt, eyes full open. He stared groggily around the empty bedroom, his thoughts broiling. He reached out in the darkness and flicked on the lamp. Hurriedly, he stuck a cigarette between his lips and lay slumped against the headboard, blowing out clouds of curling smoke. He raised his hand and saw that it shook. He muttered words without sense. Then his nostrils twitched and his lips drew back in revulsion. What the hell died? He thought. There was a heavy saccharine odor in the air, getting worse every second. He tossed off the covers. At the foot of the bed he found them, a thick pile of livid purple flowers arranged as an offering. He looked at them a moment and then bent over to pick them up and throw them away. He drew back, gasping, as a thorn punctured his right thumb. He pressed out bright blood drops and sucked the wound, his brain assailed by the thickening smell of the ugly blooms. "It's very nice of you," he sent her the message, "but no more flowers." She looked at him. She doesn't get it. He knew. "Do you understand?" he asked. Floods of affection gurgled over the layers of his brain like syrup. He stirred his coffee restlessly, and the transfer eased as though she were determined not to offend him. The kitchen was silent except for the clink of his silver on the breakfast dishes and the slight whispering rustle of her robe. He gulped down coffee and stood up to leave. "I'll eat lunch around—" "I know." Her thought cut into his, mildly commanding. He grinned a little to himself as he headed down the hall. Her telepathed message had come with an almost mother-like chiding. Then, crossing the grounds, he recalled the dream again, and the departing grin emptied his features of amusement. All morning he wondered irritably what made the Guinea men so stupid. If they dropped a bundle, it was a project to pick it up again. "They're like brainless cows," he thought, watching them through the office windows as they plodded through their tasks, eyes dull and unblinking, their thick shoulders sloping inward. He knew definitely now that they weren't telepathic. He'd tried several times to give them orders with his mind alone, and there was no receipt of message. They reacted only to loudly repeated words of 2 syllables, or preferably less, and they reacted moronically at that. In the middle of the morning, he looked up from the backlog of paperwork that Corrigan had left and realized, with some shock, that her thoughts were reaching him all the way from the house. And yet they weren't thoughts he could translate into words. They were just sensations, amorphously present. He got the feeling that she was checking, sending out exploratory beams now and again to see if all was well with him. The first few times it did no more than amuse him. He chuckled softly and went back to his work. But then the proddings assumed an annoyingly regular time pattern, and he began to squirm in his chair. He found himself becoming rigidly erect and anticipating them seconds before they came. By late morning, he was repulsing them consciously, tossing his pen on the desk and ordering her angrily to leave him alone when he worked. Her thoughts would break off contritely and soon come back again, like creeping things that stole upon him, insinuating and beyond insult. His nerves began to fray a little. He left the office and prowled the warehouse floor, tearing open bundles and checking goods with impatient fingers. The thoughts followed him around faithfully. "How duty?" said the Gnee foreman every time Lindell passed, making him angrier yet. Once he straightened up suddenly over a bundle and said loudly, "Go away!" The foreman jumped a foot in the air. His pencil and clipboard went flying, and he hid behind a pillar and looked fearfully at Lindell. Lindell pretended not to notice. Later, back in the office, he sat thinking, the open logbook before him. No wonder the Gnee men didn't telepath, he thought. They knew what was good for them. Then he looked out the window at the plodding line of workers. What if they weren't just avoiding telepathy? What if they were incapable of it, had once held the ability and, because of it, had been broken to their present state of witless stolidity? He thought of what Martin had said about the women outnumbering the men, and a phrase entered his brain, matriarchy by mind. The phrase offended him, but he was suddenly afraid that it might be true. It would explain why the other men had cracked. For if the women were in control, it might well be that in their inherent lust for dominance, they made no distinction between their own men and the men from Earth. A man is a man is a man. He twisted angrily at the idea of possibly being considered on a level with the dolts who lived in the village. He stood up abruptly. "I'm not hungry," he thought. "Not at all. But I'm going back to the house and order her to make me lunch and let her know I'm not hungry either. I'll make her used to being dominated herself, and then she'll get no chance to pick at me. No bug-eyed female Gnee, by God, is going to get me down." Then he blinked and turned away quickly when he realized that he was staring at the wild pattern of scratches on the far office wall, and the belt without a buckle that still curled limply underneath the cot. The dream again. It tore at his brain tissues with claws of razor, sweat covering him. He tossed on the bed with a groan and was suddenly awake, staring into the darkness. He thought he saw something at the foot of the bed. He closed his eyes and shook his head and looked again. The room was empty. He felt mind-drenching thoughts recede like some alien fog. His fists contracted angrily. "She's been at me while I slept," he thought. "God damn her hide, she's been at me." He pushed back the covers and crawled to the foot of the bed nervously. He couldn't see them, but the cloying fumes undulated up from the floor like erected serpents slithering into his nostrils. Gagging, he slumped down on the mattress, his stomach wrenched. "Why?" His brain mumbled over and over. "My God, why?" Angrily, he threw the flowers away in her sight, and the thoughts pleaded and showered over him like raindrops. "I said no, didn't I?" he yelled at her. Then he sat down at the table and controlled himself as well as he could. "I've got a long way to go," he told his will. "Ease off, ease off." Now he was sure he knew why it was only 6 months. That would be more than enough. "But I won't crack," he commanded himself. "It's a cinch. She isn't going to crack, so conserve yourself. She's too stupid to crack," he thought deliberately, hoping she'd pick it up. She apparently did, for her shoulders slumped dejectedly all at once, and during breakfast she circled him like a timorous wraith, keeping her face averted and her thoughts aloof. He found himself almost sorry for her then. It probably wasn't her fault. It was just an inborn trait among the Gnee women. Then he realized that her thoughts were at him again, tender and gratefully maudlin. He tried to neutralize himself and ignore them as they sought to break through his apathy like honeyed picks. All day he worked hard and made payments in spices and grain to the Gnee foreman. He wondered if the payments would go eventually to the women, wherever they were. "I'm taping my voice," he dictated later that night. "I want to hear myself talking so I can forget her. There's no one else here to talk to. I have to talk to myself. A sad case. Well, here goes. Here I am, on Station 4, folks, having a wonderful time and wish you were here instead of me. Oh, it's not that bad, don't get me wrong, but I guess I know what knocked out Corrigan and the poor bastards before him. It was Lover and her cannibal mind eating them up. But I'll tell you this, cousins, it's not going to eat me up. That much you can put bets on. Lover isn't going to... No, I didn't call you. Come on, get out of my life, will you? Go to a movie or something. Yeah, I know. We'll go to bed then. Just leave me alone. Alone. There, that for her. She'll have to go some to get me clawing at the wallpaper. But he carefully locked the door to his room when he went to bed. And he groaned in his sleep because of the same nightmare, and his limbs thrashed, and all peace and rest were crowded out. He twisted into wakefulness in mid-morning and stumbled up to check the door. He fumbled at the lock with heavy fingers. Finally, his thickened centers divined the fact that the door was still locked, and he went back to bed in a weaving line and fell on it in a stupered sleep. When he woke up in the morning, there were flowers at the foot of his bed, luxuriantly purple and foul-smelling. The door was still locked. He couldn't ask her about it because he left the kitchen in revulsion when she called him dear. No more flowers, I promise, cried her pursuing thoughts. He locked himself in the living room and sat at the desk, feeling sick. Get hold of yourself, he ordered his system, clasping his hands tightly and holding his teeth firmly clenched. Eat? She was outside the door. He knew it. He closed his eyes. Go away. Leave me alone, he told her. I'm sorry, dear, she said. Stop calling me dear, he shouted, slamming his fist on the desk surface. As he twisted in the chair, his belt buckle caught on the drawer handle and it jerked out. He found himself staring down at the shiny gas pistol. Almost unconsciously, he reached down and touched its slick barrel. He shoved in the drawer with a convulsive movement. None of that. He looked around suddenly, feeling alone and free. He got up and hurried to the window. Down below, he saw her hurrying across the grounds with a basket on her arm. She's going for vegetables, he thought. But what made her leave so suddenly? Of course, the pistol. She must have gotten his thoughts of violent intent. He sighed and calmed down a little. I've still got cards in my hand, he soothed himself. While she was out, he decided to look in her room and see if he could find the shifting panel that enabled her to enter his room with the flowers. He hurried down the hall and pushed open the door to her barely furnished little chamber. His brain was immediately attacked by the odor of a reeking pile of the purple flowers in one corner. He held a hand over his mouth and nose as he looked down in distaste at the living and dead blossoms. What did they represent? An offering of thoughtfulness? His throat contracted. Or was it more than thoughtfulness? He grimaced at the thought and remembered that first evening when he dubbed her Lover. What had possessed him to choose that name from the infinity of possible names? He hoped he didn't know. He hoped he'd never know. On her couch he found a small pile of odds and ends. There was a button, a pair of broken shoelaces, the piece of crumpled paper he had told her to throw away, and a belt buckle with the initials W.C. stamped on it. There were no secret panels. He sat in the kitchen staring into an untouched cup of coffee. No way she could get in his room. W.C. William Corrigan. He had to fight it, keep fighting it. Time passed. Suddenly he realized that she was back in the house again. There was no sound. It was like the return of a ghost. But he knew it. A cloud of feeling preceded her, came plunging through the rooms like an excited puppy searching. Thoughts swirled. You are well? You are not angry? Lover is back. All hastily and eagerly clutching at him. She swept into the room so quickly that his hands twitched and he upset the cup. The hot liquid splashed over his shirt and trousers as he jumped back, knocking over the chair. She put down the basket and got a towel. He stood there, lips drained of color as she patted the stains dry. She'd never been so close to him. She'd never actually touched him before, except for that first revolting handshake. There was an aroma about her. It made his chest heave painfully, and all the time her thoughts caressed his mind as her hands seemed to be caressing his body. There, I am here with you, David, dear." Almost in horror, he stared at her spongy pink skin, her huge eyes, her tiny wound of a mouth. And in the office that morning, he made 3 straight mistakes in the logbook and tore out the whole page and hurled it across the room with a choking cry of rage. Avoid her. No point in arguing or threatening. He tried to raise his mental ground so that her thoughts could not find domicile there. If he relaxed his mind enough, her thoughts flowed through and out, perhaps taking part of his will as they left, but he had to risk that. And if he worked hard and crowded his head with stodgy banks of figures, it kept her at a distance, and his hands did not tremble so badly. "Maybe I should sleep in the office," he thought. Then he found Corrigan's note. It was on a slip of paper stuck away in the logbook, hidden white on white. He only found it because he was going through the pages one at a time, reciting the dates in a loud voice to keep his mind filled. "God help me," read the note, black and jagged lettered. "Lover comes through the walls." Lindell stared. "I saw it myself," attested the words. "I'm going out of my mind. Always that damn animal mind tugging and tearing at me. And now I can't even shut away her body. I slept out here, but she came anyway." Lindell read it again, and it was a wind fanning the fires of terror. Through the walls. The words agonized him. Was it possible? It was Corrigan, then, who had named her lover. From the very start, the relationship had been on her terms. Lindell had had nothing to say about it. "Lover," he muttered, and her thoughts enveloped him suddenly like a bat's wings swooping down from the sky. He flung up his arms and cried out, "Leave me alone!" And as her phantom mind slipped off, he had the sense that it was with less timidity, with the patience such as a man knowing his own great strength can afford to display. He sank back on the chair, exhausted suddenly, depleted with fighting it. He crumpled the note in his right hand, thinking of the scratches on the wall behind him, and he saw in his mind Corrigan tossing on the cot, burning with fever, rearing up with a shriek of horror to see her standing before him. But then the scene was dark. He rubbed a shaking hand over his face. "Don't crack," he said to himself, but it was more a frightened entreaty than a command. Wasting fogs of premonition flooded over him in chilling waves. She comes through the walls. That night, again, he poured down the bathroom sink the potion she had made. He locked the door, and in the lightless room he squatted in one corner, peering and waiting, lungs bellowing only because he forced himself to remember to breathe. The thermostat lowered the heat. The floorboards got icy, and his teeth started chattering. "I'm not going to bed," he vowed angrily. He didn't know why it was suddenly the bed that frightened him. "I don't know." He forced the words through his brain because he felt vaguely that he did know, and he didn't want to admit it, even for a second. But after hours of futile waiting, he had to straighten up with a snapping of joints and stumble back to bed. There he crawled under the blankets and lay trembling, trying to stay awake. "She'll come while I'm asleep," he thought. "I mustn't sleep." When he woke up in the morning, there were flowers on the floor for him. And that was another day before a mass of days that sank crushed into the lump of months. You can get used to horror, he thought, when it has lost immediacy and is no longer pungent and has become a steady diet, when it has degraded to a chain of mind-numbing events, when shocks are like scalpels picking and jabbing at delicate ganglia until they have lost all feeling. Yet, though it was no longer terror, it was worse, for his nerves were raw and bleeding a hemophilia of rage. He fought his battles to the dregs of seconds, gaunt-willed, shouting her off, firing lances of hate from his despairing mind, tortured by her surrenders that were her victories. She always came back, like an enraging cat, rubbing endless sycophantic sides against him, filling him with thoughts of, "Yes, admit it," he screamed to himself through midnight struggles. Thoughts of love. And there was the undercurrent, the promise of new shock that would topple his already shaking edifice. It needed only that, an added push, another stab of the blade, one more drop of the shattering hammer. The shapeless threat hung over him. He waited for it, poised for it 100 times an hour, especially at night. Waiting. And sometimes when he thought he knew what it was he was waiting for, the shock of admission made him shudder and made him want to claw at walls and break things and run until the blackness swallowed him. If he could only forget her for a while, just a little while, it would be all right. He mumbled it to himself as he set up the movie projector. She begged from the kitchen, "Can I see?" "No!" Now all his replies, worded or thought, were like the snapping retorts of a jangled old man. If only the 6 months would end. That was the problem. The months were not moving fast enough, and time was like her, not to be reasoned with or intimidated. There were many reels of film on the wall shelf, but his hand reached up without hesitation and picked out one. He didn't notice it. His mind was calloused to suggestion. He adjusted the reel on the spindle and turned out the lights. He sat down with a tired groan as the flickering milky light cone shot out from the lens, throwing pictures on the screen. A lean, dark-bearded man was posing, arms crossed, white teeth showing in an artificial smile. He came closer to the camera. The sun flashed, blurring the film a second. Black screen. Title: Picture of Me. The man, high-cheekboned, bright-eyed, stood laughing soundlessly out from the screen. He pointed to his side, and the camera swung around. Lindell sat up sharply. It was the station. Apparently it was fall, for as the camera swept past the house, the village, jerking a moment as though changing hands, he saw the trees surrounded by heaps of dead leaves. He sat there shivering, waiting for something. He didn't know what. The screen blacked. Another title, roughly etched in white. Jeff in the office. The man peered at the camera, an idiotic smile on his face, white skin accentuated by the immaculate black outline of his beard. Fade out. In. The man doing a jig around the empty warehouse floor, hands poised delicately in the air, his dark hair bouncing wildly on his skull. Another title flashing on the screen. Lindell stiffened in his seat, his breath cut off abruptly. Lover. There was her face, horribly repellent in black and white. She was standing by his bedroom window, her face a mask of delight. He could tell it was delight now. Once he would have said she looked like a maniac, her mouth twisted like a living scar, her grotesque eyes staring. He spun, and her robe swirled out. He saw her puffy ankles, and his stomach muscles grew rock-taut. She approached the camera. He saw filmy eyelids slide down over her eyes. His hands began to tremble violently. It was his dream. It made him sick. It was his dream to the detail. Then it had never been a dream, not from his own mind. A sob tore at his throat. She was undoing the robe. "Here it is," gibbered his mind in a panic. He whimpered and reached out shakily to turn off the projector. "No!" It was a cold command in the darkness. "Watch me," she ordered. He sat bound in a vice of terror, staring in sick fascination as the robe slid from her neck, pulled down over her round shoulders. She twisted sensuously. The robe sank into a heavy, swirling heap on the floor. He screamed, flung out an arm that swept into the burning projector. It crashed down on the floor. The room was night. He struggled up and lurched across the room. "Nice? Nice?" The word dug at him mercilessly as he fumbled for the door. He found it, rushed into the hall. Her door opened, and she stood in the half-light, the robe hanging from one spongy shoulder. He jolted to a halt. "Get out of here!" he yelled. "No." He made a convulsive move for her, hands out like rigid claws. The sight of her pink, moist flesh spun him away. "Yes?" her mind suggested. It seemed as if he heard it spoken in a sly, rising voice. "Listen!" he cried, reaching out for the door to his room. "Listen, you have to go. Do you understand? Go to your mate." He twisted back in utter horror. "I am with him now," her message had said. The thought paralyzed him. He stared, open-mouthed, heart pounding in slow, gigantic beats as the robe slipped over her shoulders and started down her arms. He whirled with a cry and slammed the door behind him. His fingers shook on the lock. Her thoughts were a wailing in his mind. He shook in fright and sickness and knew it was no good because he couldn't lock her out. There were monkeys chattering in his brain. They lay on their backs in a circle and kicked at the inside of his skull. They grabbed juicy blobs of gray in their dirty paws and they squeezed. He rolled on his side with a groan. "Oh, go crazy," he said. "Like Corrigan, like all of them, but the first one, that slimy one who started it all, who added new and hideous warp to the corrugation of her dominating mind, who had named her lover because he meant it." Suddenly he sat up with a gasp of terror, staring at the foot of the bed. "She comes through the walls," howled his brain. Nothing there, his eyes saw. His fingers clutched at the sheets. He felt sweat dripping off his brow and rolling down the embankment of his nose. He lay back. Up again. He whimpered like a frightened child. A cloud of blackness was falling over him. He groaned, "No," in the blackness. "No use." He whined, "Sleep, sleep." The word throbbed, swelled, and depressed in his brain. This was the time. He knew it, knew. The blade was falling, sanity decapitated and twitching bloody in the basket. No! He tried to push himself up, but he couldn't. Sleep. A black tide of night, hovering, tracking. Sleep. He fell on the pillow, pushed up weakly on one elbow. No! His lungs were crusted. No! He struggled. It was too much. He screamed a thick, bubbling scream. She threw his will aside, snapped and futile. She was using all her strength now, and he was de-enervated, beaten. He thudded back on the pillow, glassy-eyed and limp. He moaned weakly, and his eyes shut, opened, shut, opened, shut. The dream again. Insane. Not a dream. When he woke up, there were no flowers. The courtship was ended. He gaped blankly and unbelievingly at the imprint of a body beside him on the bed. It was still warm and moist. He laughed out loud. He wrote curse words in his diary. He wrote them in tall, black letters, holding the pencil like a knife. He wrote them in the logbook, too. He tore up vouchers if they were not the right color. His entries were crooked lines of figures, like wavy numbered tendrils. Sometimes he didn't care about that. Mostly he didn't notice. He prowled the filled warehouse behind locked doors, red-eyed and muttering. He clambered up on the bundles and stared out through the skylight at the empty sky. He was lighter by 15 pounds, unwashed. His face was black with wiry growth. He was going to have an immaculate beard. She wanted it. She didn't want him to wash or shave or be healthy. She called him Jeff, dear. You can't fight that, he told himself. You can't win because you lose. If you advance, you are retreating, because when you are too tired to fight, she comes back, and she takes your body and your soul. That was why he whispered to the warehouse so no one would hear, "There is a thing to do." And that was why, at night, he sneaked to the living room and put the gas pistol in his pocket. Never harm the Gnees. Well, that was wrong. It was kill or be killed. That's why I'm taking the pistol to bed with me. That's why I'm stroking it as I stare up at the ceiling. Yes, this is it. This is my rock to rest on through the day nights. And he turned over plans as an animal snuffles over flat stones to find bugs for supper. Days, days, days. He whispered, "Kill her." He nodded and smiled to himself and patted the cool metal. "You're my friend," he said. "You're my only friend. She has to die. We all know that." He made lots of plans, and they were all the same one. He killed her 1,000,000 times in his mind, in secret chambers of his mind that he had discovered and opened, where he could crouch, clever and undisturbed, while he made his plans. He walked and looked at the workers' village. Animals. I'm not going to end up like you. I'm not going to, and when I do, I am... Lindell lurched up from his office desk, eyes wide, slaver running over his lips. He held the pistol tight in his palsied hand. He flung open the office door and staggered over the concrete, through the lanes between roof-high stacks. His mouth was so tight that his clamped jaws hurt. He held the pistol pointing. He kicked up the catch and dragged back one heavy door. He plunged out into the hot sunlight and broke into a run. Wisps of terror licked out from the house. He thought of murder with harder, more savage joy. He ran faster. He fell down because his legs had no feeling. The pistol went flying. He crawled to it and tenderly brushed off the dust. He stood up dizzily and started to hobble. He was hearing things, not lovers' thoughts, for once. He looked up and blinked and knew he was going insane. It was a cargo ship. The cargo ship. Only, of course, it couldn't be. He dropped the pistol and slumped down beside it, plucking at blue grass with an idiot intensity that he knew was like the Gnee men's. He was careful not to watch the ship as it seemed to come down, and the hatches made an impossibly convincing clang, and men appeared to climb out. "Go away," he said to the illusion of a man standing beside him. "You're not here. The 6 months aren't over." His voice was quite normal, except that it broke into giggles and sobs while he had a fist fight with the air. "You'll be all right," the man apparently said, and he felt something that might have been an insect bite, though he thought it was the man pricking him with a hypo of sedative. 2 other men came with a stretcher and a sheet that they wrapped him tightly in, and they began carrying him, shrieking and battling, toward the Mirage ship. "You can't take me away," he shouted. "I've got to kill Lover first." "It wouldn't do any good," the first man said. "There are a lot more where she came from. One at a time for every guy we station here, it looks like." "She comes through the walls!" Liddell screamed. "That's what you get to believe," said the man soothingly. "It must be pretty fierce, but that's all over now. You're going back home." Lindell tried to fight free of the sheet. "Let me at least warn the next guy." "It wouldn't do any good. He wouldn't believe you. That's why you didn't see us take away the poor character you relieved." And then the sedative took hold, and Lindell fell asleep. The dreams came, but with them was the sound of rockets blasting off, and the spongy image of the Guinea woman grew smaller and smaller and less frightful. But he still smelled the livid flowers. He knew he always would. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.